Nigeria, as a country, might be shaken down for the better should the American combat troops storm there to fight against terrorists. Wicked blogger Ghana would explain how exactly the USA plans to execute their plan. But before anything, smash the subscribe button and like this video. Tension has grown sharply between the United States and Nigeria after President Donald Trump accused the Nigerian government of allowing widespread persecution of Christians. Trump said Nigeria has failed to protect Christian communities from violence and warned that his administration might take serious action, including cutting aid or sending US troops to intervene. These comments caused immediate outrage in Abuja. Nigerian officials rejected Trump's statement, saying the country is not religiously intolerant and that the violence he referred to affects both Christians and Muslims. According to Nigeria's government, Trump's claims are misleading and ignore the complex realities of communal clashes and terrorism that the country has been battling for years. Despite Nigeria's response, Trump has stood by his words. He recently placed Nigeria back on the US list of countries of particular concern for religious freedom violations. Reports from Washington indicate that the Trump administration is reviewing possible sanctions and even limited military actions to protect vulnerable populations in northern Nigeria. Nigeria has described the threat as unnecessary and provocative, warning that any foreign military involvement would violate its sovereignty. Diplomats are now working to ease the tension, but Trump's hard line has already unsettled relations between the two countries. For many observers, this conflict goes beyond religion. It's also about political influence and America's renewed interest in African security under Trump's second term. Some analysts believe Trump is using Nigeria's situation to show that his government will be tougher on human rights abuses and terrorism in Africa, while critics accuse him of trying to interfere in Nigeria's internal affairs. As it stands, both governments remain firm in their positions. The US says it will not ignore what it calls religious persecution, while Nigeria insists it will not be bullied into submission. Whether this dispute ends through diplomacy or escalates further will depend on how far Trump decides to push his warning in the coming weeks. If Donald Trump decides to send US troops to Nigeria, here's how it would realistically unfold and what their mission would look like once they arrive. First, he would need to give a formal order through the Pentagon. The military would draw up detailed plans outlining what kind of force to send, whether small special forces teams or a larger combat group, and what their objectives would be. In parallel, diplomats would work to get either Nigeria's approval or at least regional support to avoid being accused of violating another country's sovereignty. Before any boots hit the ground, US intelligence units would likely increase drone surveillance and gather more data on possible targets. Military planners would also identify staging areas in neighboring countries or offshore bases for logistics, refueling, and medical evacuation. If no neighboring country agrees to host them, the US could rely on aircraft carriers or long-range flights from existing African or European bases. Once troops deploy, their operations would depend on the mission scope. The first phase would likely involve special operations forces conducting precision raids, hostage rescues, or strikes against high-value terrorist targets. These missions would be fast, coordinated, and supported by drones, satellites, and surveillance aircraft. If the goal expands beyond targeted strikes, a second phase might include larger units focused on securing areas, training Nigerian forces, or supporting joint operations. The troops would set up forward operating bases, establish no-fly zones if ordered, and coordinate intelligence sharing with local forces. The US would maintain strict control over engagement rules to avoid civilian casualties and unnecessary confrontations. Communication will be key. Every move will be closely coordinated between Washington, US, Africa Command, and local military leadership. The White House would brief Congress to stay within legal limits unless it sought full authorization for an extended mission. On the ground, American troops would likely focus on intelligence-driven missions, avoiding large-scale combat unless attacked. They'd rely heavily on technology drones, satellites, and special reconnaissance teams to locate targets rather than conduct traditional warfare. Trump's style suggests he'd want visible results quickly, so expect short, high-impact operations designed to show strength without getting bogged down. Airstrikes and special forces actions would likely come first, with any long-term deployment depending on Nigeria's cooperation and you. S, domestic politics. In short, if the plan moves forward, U.S. troops in Nigeria would operate with speed, precision, and minimal visibility, focusing on targeted missions, not occupation. The deployment would combine pressure, intelligence, and force to achieve fast results while avoiding a prolonged ground war. If US troops eventually land in Nigeria under Donald Trump's command, the move would reshape the political and security landscape for both countries. For Nigeria, the first visible effect would be an immediate boost in military capability. American forces bring advanced surveillance systems, drones, and intelligence support that could quickly weaken terrorist groups in the north. The Nigerian army, which has struggled for years against Boko Haram and other insurgents, would gain access to better equipment, training, and logistical support. In the short term, that partnership could stabilize certain regions and give citizens a sense of renewed hope in government security efforts. However, the political cost would be heavy. Allowing foreign troops to operate on Nigerian soil would spark outrage among citizens who see such action as a direct assault on national sovereignty. Protest and political opposition would rise quickly, accusing the government of inviting an external power to handle domestic problems. Extremist groups would seize on that anger, using it as propaganda to recruit new fighters and paint themselves as defenders of Nigerian pride. Even a single civilian casualty from a US airstrike or operation could inflame anti-American sentiment across the country. Over time, this could weaken the government's legitimacy and fuel deeper divisions. There's also the risk of dependency. If Nigeria begins to rely too heavily on US intervention, its own military reforms and internal security structures could stall. What begins as tactical support might turn into a long-term crutch, with the country struggling to regain full control once the Americans leave. For a nation that positions itself as Africa's regional leader, that image would take a serious hit. For the United States, a deployment to Nigeria would expand its reach in West Africa and give Washington a new base of influence in a region where China and Russia are increasingly active. The intelligence and counterterrorism advantages would be significant. From Nigeria, the U.S. could monitor extremist networks spreading across the Sahel and Gulf of Guinea. Successful operations would strengthen America's image as a global power, capable of decisive action, and could open new economic opportunities through closer ties with Africa's largest economy. But the risks would be just as large. Any military involvement in Nigeria would be costly and politically controversial at home. Americans are already tired of foreign wars, and a new campaign in Africa would face strong resistance in Congress and among voters. US. Casualties would turn public opinion sharply against the mission, forcing the administration to justify why it sent troops to yet another unstable region. There's also the danger of mission creep, where a limited operation quietly grows into a drawn-out conflict with no clear exit. Diplomatically, Washington could face backlash from other African nations that view foreign military presence as a form of neocolonialism. A single misstep, especially one involving civilian deaths, could undo years of American soft power work on the continent. In simple terms, both sides stand to gain in the short run, but risk losing much more in the long term. Nigeria might enjoy a temporary surge in security, yet its sovereignty and public unity could suffer. The United States could strengthen its grip in West Africa, but it would also expose itself to another costly, unpopular conflict far from home. Smash the subscribe button for more updates on Wicked Blogger Ghana.